From its beginnings in the 18th century up until the middle of the 20th century, Cheshire, Ohio prospered. Its location along the Ohio River allowed for transportation as well as resources. Mining and farming were common occupations among residents. However, by the 1950s, mining had declined and farming had suffered due to devastating floods. For some villagers, both Kyer Creek and Gavin power plants were welcomed additions to the area. Their arrival marked the dawn of the new era, but little did they know that Gavin would soon become a menace and eventually lead to the demise of the community. In 1841 through 1860, maps were recorded documenting the official beginning of the village of Cheshire. Coal mining began in the 1860s and prospered over the next 20 years. In July of 1863, the historic Morgan's Raid, the only significant Civil War battle to take place in Ohio, took place just northeast of the village. Raiders were captured and held in Cheshire Hotel and School Dormitory before being sent to Cincinnati on the Ohio River. The first railroad tracks were laid in the village in October of 1880. In December of the same year, Cheshire villager William Sims wrote, quote, "The first train went from here to Pomeroy and back. Glory, glory." End quote. 1913 was a devastating year for Cheshire residents due to a massive flood. The Gallipolis Weekly Tribune wrote on April 25, 1913, quote, "The beautiful and prosperous village of Cheshire is almost a complete wreck. Words fail to describe the misery caused by the terrible flood." End quote. In 1937, disaster struck again for the small village. Another devastating flood nearly destroyed Cheshire. Kyer Creek Power Plant, owned by the Ohio Valley Electric Company, opened in 1954, just a mile outside of the village of Cheshire. Kyer Creek soon initiated the incorporation of Cheshire, and by doing so, the now self-governed village, ran by an elected mayor and village council, could receive funding from the county to improve Cheshire. On December 15, 1967, 46 people were killed when the Silver Bridge connecting nearby Gallipolis, Ohio, with Point Pleasant, West Virginia collapsed. One Cheshire villager died, while another survived the accident. In 1975, at the cost of $650 million, the General James M. Gavin Power Plant opened its 2,600 megawatt facility. In order to build the facility, the company, American Electric Power, bought land near the village. Cheshire's location was ideal. Not only was it located on the Ohio River, but there was also local access to coal and railroads. By the 1980s, northeastern states and environmental groups became concerned about the sulfur emissions coming from Gavin's smokestack. Greenpeace activists disguised as painters parachuted off Gavin's 1,000-foot smokestack to raise awareness. Shortly after, Gavin, who had become concerned about possible lawsuits, replaced their 1,000-foot stack with two 830-feet stacks, subsequently causing the emissions to fall closer to the village. In 1994, in order to comply with the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, AEP installed flue gas desulfurization systems, more commonly known as scrubbers. AEP reported that the scrubbers reduced sulfur dioxide emissions by at least 90%. However, villagers complained of loud noises, dirt, and damaging fly ash. In 1998, AEP built low NOx burners at the Gavin plant in an attempt to reduce the amount of nitrogen oxide in the air. AEP announced their plans to update the plant with selective catalytic reduction units in 2000. The SCRs were designed to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions. During this process, ammonia was injected into the exhaust gas, ultimately converting the nitrogen oxide into harmless nitrogen and water. The first SCR was completed in the spring of 2001, and it wasn't long before villagers realized the SCRs emitted an unexpected byproduct, sulfur trioxide. On hot and humid days, the emissions covered the town in a thick blue haze, referred to as the blue plume. Residents reported side effects such as sore throats and eyes, as well as difficulty breathing. The EPA soon set up a device in the village hall to monitor the sulfur emissions. In the fall of the same year, villagers became frustrated by continuing sulfuric emissions and hired a law group to represent them in pursuing property and possible health problems against Gavin's owner, AEP. February of 2002, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, an agency of the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, published results of a health consultation. The agency concluded that the sulfuric acid emissions posed a short-term risk to some residents, particularly those with asthma. On April 16, 2002, AEP and villagers reached a compromise. AEP announced that they had planned to acquire the incorporated village of Cheshire for $20 million. Property owners within the limits of Cheshire would receive 3.5 times the value of their homes, while property owners not within the limits would only receive 2 times the value. Renters would receive $5,000 for each year they lived in Cheshire, up to $25,000. However, residents must have signed a health waiver, as well as a confidentiality agreement. $500,000 would be set aside if residents were to appeal their allotted amount, and the attorneys would take home roughly 33% of the overall settlement money. The buyout remained uncertain through the spring and summer. The uncertainty, together with the criticism from outsiders, created conflict within the village. Some residents even began to reconsider the buyout offer, while some decided against it, and by the end of summer of 2002, a new proposition was made to the elderly community. Cheshire residents over the age of 71 would be able to sell their property to AEP and remain in their homes rent-free for the remainder of their lives. On September 13, 2002, residents were forced to decide whether or not to participate in the buyout. Shortly after, on September 24th, AEP announced they had finalized the buyout. AEP's Senior Vice President Bill Sigmund declared in the press release that, quote, "We could preserve the community while still addressing both the plant's need for land and the concerns of some of the residents," end quote. But is the village really preserved? About 90% of the village residents participated in the buyout, leaving only about 12 people remaining in the village. The Methodist Church closed its doors, and many homes and businesses were torn down. Grass covers the land where buildings once stood, and even though it remains incorporated, Cheshire is often referred to as a 21st century ghost town. Villagers who once welcomed the Gavin plant were pushed out, and Cheshire, Ohio, a once prospering village, has seen its demise.